Why did Jesus die on a cross? Someone forced me to answer that question. Well, they didn't force me. They just asked the question forcefully. The cross, Pastor, why did it have to be the cross? Why couldn't Jesus have died some other way for the forgiveness of our sins? That's a good question. We certainly could say, well, the Old Testament had predicted that Jesus would be pierced, that he would be cursed when he would be lifted up and hung on a tree. You think of that scene with Moses in the book of Numbers and the bronze snake. It was lifted up on a pole, and when people looked up in faith, they were healed. Or we think of, is it Psalm 22 or Isaiah 53? He was pierced and wounded for our transgressions. So if Jesus was going to fulfill the Old Testament, we would have to say, well, he needed to be pierced. He needed to be lifted up, and that's what the cross was. But if you're pretty quick on your feet, you could say, well, if God knew it wasn't going to be a cross, he wouldn't have made those prophecies and predictions in the first place. So, what was it about Roman crucifixion that made it the perfect fit for the sacrifice of Jesus? Here's the best answer that I can give. The cross proved just how foul, loathsome, detestable, and ungodly sin is. How much God absolutely hates sinfulness. How he is so just and good that he has to deal with it in an extreme way. If Jesus died on a cross, no one can look at Jesus on the cross and say that God doesn't take sin seriously. That matters too, doesn't it? I've been in a courtroom as part of my job as a pastor. I've loved people who've been victims of sins and ended up in court, and I've loved people who've committed sins and broken the law and ended up in court. And what I can tell you this, no one wants justice to be ignored when someone gets hurt. No one wants a judge to say, oh, whatever, I'm forgiving, I'm kind. Bailiff, let the guy out of here. Like, no, that's not right. When something bad happens, there's a sense of justice within us that cries for it to be taken seriously. If he hurt someone, if she damaged someone, if they abused a child, if they ended someone else's life, something has to be. We respect judges who are serious about sin. In the cross of Jesus, as Jesus is literally being tortured, as he's slowly suffocating, you have to say, if that's the price of sin, God hates sin. When that person gossiped about you or took your work for granted, when you went the extra mile and they didn't say a word of gratitude, like the things that hurt us, the cross proves that God is so serious. He recognizes just how bad and terrible sin is. And the cross proves the insane love, the unlimited patience, the crazy kindness that God has for sinful people like us. The fact that God himself, Jesus, would come down from heaven and go through that for us is a great passage. One of my favorites, Romans 5, verse 8, says, God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Philippians 2, Jesus, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So the fact that God would do that, sometimes you might feel like, well, God doesn't love me. Look at the cross. Why would God go through that if he didn't love you? And so do you see, just like the cross has two parts, two pieces of wood, so at the cross we see the justice of God, his hatred of sin, and we see the love of God, his forgiveness for sinners. And one passage that unpacks this pretty complex is Romans chapter 3. Let me read just verse 26. Why is Jesus dying as a sacrifice on the cross? It says this: God did all this to demonstrate his righteousness, so as to be just, he takes sin seriously, and to be the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. At the cross, God can stand up for his holiness and say that he takes sin seriously, and he can be the one to look you in the eye and say, I forgive you, I justify you through Jesus. You can be my son, my daughter, my dearly loved child. So why cross? It wasn't an accident. It was meant to prove the justice and the love of God.